But unlike Alex Salmon, I'm not going to make an absolute humiliation of myself by pretending I'm at a football match, not the Royal Box at Wimbledon. In many ways, I think immigration is a window. It's a window through which we see our relationship with the peoples of the rest of the world, and conversely, how they see their relationship with us. In a rapidly changing world where globalization has brought greater interdependence and new economic opportunities that have been matched by greater international mobility, how do we set the parameters of our immigration policy to ensure that our view is clear and wide-ranging? It is a view that's changed considerably over time, and how we have managed the relationship in the past between those already in our country and those seeking to join us is something that I think is worth reflecting upon at the outset. The United Kingdom is both a land of immigration and integration. These forces have made us who and what we are today. Very few of us could claim to be descended exclusively from indigenous British stock, not least because historically there's really no such thing. What we describe at any one point in time as our national identity is something that, in fact, has altered over the centuries, with our national characteristics moulding and merging with the influences that have come to our shores from overseas. From the Norman conquest onwards, this country has been a successful, if not always absolutely willing, partner in assimilating a wide range of cultures and interests, and we in turn have shaped the world around us. Within our own borders, the movement of English, Scots, Welsh and Irish has meant that we are all simultaneously able to identify with different national characteristics while sharing a forged sense of Britishness. Of course, the scale of immigration has varied enormously over time. During the periods of so-called mass migration in the post-war years, a process which some regarded at the time as an almost existential threat, the numbers related to tens of thousands, rather than the hundreds of thousands coming to our country today. Indeed, between 1964 and 1980, there were more people leaving the UK than there were arriving. And even in the 1960s, when warnings of the cultural challenges associated with mass migration were first voiced, we were dealing with significantly fewer than half the arrivals we're seeing today. The UK has been, and still is, one of the most open and generous countries in Europe, if not the world. Yet in recent times, the tolerance of the British people has been stretched more than ever before. So I'd like to begin, therefore, by examining just why such an open-minded nation with such a strong record of integration should now place the issue of immigration at the top of the list of public concerns. I recently described the willful extension of the welfare state into the affluent middle class as the greatest crime of Labour's time in office. If that is so, and I still believe that to be true, then their policy on immigration ran it a close second. Labour shamefully mismanaged our borders, not only out of incompetence, which was their natural way, but quite deliberately. As Hazel Blears admitted, they went far too far, making immigration a social policy designed to push New Labour multiculturalism, and in the process, they alienated swathes of white working-class people. They were indulging in social engineering for the sake of their own electoral ambitions, and slamming those who disagreed with them as ill-educated or racist. The abolition of the primary purpose rule, which, let me remind you what that was, required foreign nationals married to British citizens to prove that the main point of their marriage was not to achieve British citizenship and thereby residency rights. That was the first step to the opening up of our borders. And as a result of Labour's abolition of the primary purpose rule, within weeks of coming to office, approximately one new immigrant arrived in this country for every minute that Labour were in power thereafter. By contrast, the Conservative Party manifesto at the last election promised to reduce net migration, and a great deal of progress has been made, with numbers falling by a third, from 250,000 in the final year of the Labour government to 160,000 now. We've clamped down on the student visa racket, tightened up our border controls and put in place transitional arrangements as new countries enter the EU. Theresa May and Mark Harper, two of the government's most competent ministers, have pushed this forwards, and David Cameron has committed to drive immigration down further until we return to a more sustainable flow in the tens, not hundreds of thousands. So I'm not here to criticise what's been done in the last 3 years, but to make the case for how we could and should go further when freed from the constraints of coalition, and make our immigration policy a centrepiece of this country's bid for success in an ever more competitive world. It's necessary not just for intellectual consistency, but for social responsibility to have the immigration debate dealt with on an entirely higher plane than we've seen in recent times. It has always been convenient for those on either end of the political spectrum to use immigration as a political football, either for the left to portray any debate as racist, or for those on the right to portray anyone coming to our country as a burden or a threat. For some, it's a debate that they would rather just leave alone completely. But as I travel around the country, it is what voters are concerned about. And maybe we, the political class, should talk about what they want, not what we want. It is, after all, their politics, not ours. Perhaps, and I have an optimistic feel on a beautiful day like this, with Labour now willing to admit its mistakes, there is the possibility of a new national consensus on the issue. And this is a really good time to look at who we need to come to help our country generate wealth and prosperity, and to move away from focusing on the headline figure of net migration. Indeed, I would caution briefly about our continued use of net migration as a measure of the immigration problem. In 2011, for example, net migration fell significantly from 252,000 to 215,000, a reduction of about 15%. Great. However, the number of people coming to this country fell only by 25,000, while the number of people leaving increased by 12,000. What does that mean? For most people, the actual number coming in is the one that matters, not the net number. And when we say immigration fell by 37,000, it still means that in that year, 2011, 566,000 people came in. Now I'll return to the theme of keeping our workforce in balance. But I'll say now that when we're looking at the cultural and social problems associated with immigration, we need to look exclusively at the number of people arriving, for it is that volume that has a pronounced impact on the communities with which very large numbers are currently settling. Let me put it another way, without the statistics. The people of Boston, in Lincolnshire, see only the hundreds of new arrivals competing with them for access to a doctor, a school place, or social housing. It doesn't dampen their frustration in the slightest when they hear that a few dozen families in the East Midlands have moved away from the country during the same period. In fact, if amongst those families was a nurse, a couple of teachers, and some of the area's most successful business people, they'd probably think that those departures exacerbated the immigration issue rather than helped it. So how do we overcome the cultural and social problems that have made immigration an issue in many of our towns and villages? I believe there are two prerequisites. The first is that there's a willingness amongst the host population to integrate those coming into the country. The second is that the incoming population has to be willing to integrate into the legal and cultural system of the hosts. Failure to achieve these is likely to result in hostility to the immigrant groups, with an increased likelihood of ghettoisation. There's also been a tendency, quite rightly and understandably, to celebrate diversity in our population. But if we only celebrate diversity and we fail to celebrate commonality, then we're unlikely to achieve diversity but fragmentation. The commonality that we must champion isn't even very much. It's a subscription to the laws and values of this country and a willingness to accept and respect our social norms. It is an enthusiasm to integrate into our communities, to speak our language, to celebrate our country's great heritage, and embrace the boundless opportunities that are our future. I think it's also a basic matter of fairness and respect for those who live here already. I believe our society has been enriched by the many cultural influences that have arrived here throughout our history. But while we're celebrating those, let's not forget to be equally, if not perhaps more, passionate about our celebration of Britain and its historic achievements. What's more, when we really do celebrate our shared identity as Britons, as we were doing this time last year at the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, or during the Olympics, or I do dare say even yesterday at Wimbledon, we do it brilliantly, and people in all parts of the country and of all backgrounds and beliefs wave the Union flag with great pride. We've been a bit shy about saying to those who come here that we'd like them to consider themselves as British, and yet, when we've given immigrant communities the opportunity to share in times of great national celebration, they've shown plenty appetite to do so. Community cohesion, although, is not just a question of allegiance to the flag and acceptance of new cultures. So many of the problems in communities where integration has not happened have been caused by a failure to pave the way for these new arrivals in terms of infrastructure, classrooms, doctors' surgeries, and other public infrastructure. The result is that, rightly or wrongly, local people have come to blame their failure to win a place for their child in school, or on the choice or choice in other parts of their public service, on the new immigrant family who's happened to come and move in down the road. People get angry about what they perceive to be happening in their communities, and it's the responsibility of government to make sure that those areas where immigration has been most acute are suitably upgraded in terms of public infrastructure. However, we need to find a way to neutralise the social and cultural tensions, because the key argument about immigration is really an economic one. The fact is that the population of the United Kingdom is continuing to age. By 2051, the proportion of 65-year-olds is projected to increase from 16% today to 24%. The age dependency ratio, the number of pensioners per 1,000 people of working age, will increase from 300, which is where it's been at a pretty steady level since the 1970s, to over 500 in that time frame. And we're not, of course, alone. With an age dependency rate of 370, Japan is already dealing with similar issues. To this end, it has used technological improvements to increase the efficiency of labourers, and furthermore, the government is trying to remobilise more of its retired and female population. Although these measures will have helped, they are not in themselves going to be enough. The United Nations has therefore recommended, and wait for this, that Japan either raises the retirement age to 77 or allows an additional 40 million migrants over the next 40 years in order to keep the ratio stable. That would represent an increase in the population which is about a third of the country's current size. That is the scale of the demographic challenge. Will we, in Britain, face a similar problem to the Japanese? Well, currently, for every 3 people paying national insurance in Britain, there is 1 person receiving a pension. In the next 40 years, however, this will change to 2 workers for every 1 pensioner. We have a problem that is based on a structural imbalance which will require a sustainable solution. Most likely, we'll have to take some, if not all, of the similar actions to Japan if we're to meet the challenge. Increasing efficiency and productivity, getting more of the working age population into work, and increasing retirement ages too, as we have already started to do. However, we must accept that we will also have to encourage economically beneficial labour into the country. If we cannot bring ourselves to do that, then the alternative is the managed decline of Britain, not an option which I suggest we should be willing to contemplate. If we're to remain at the economic top table, we must have a clear vision for where Britain's economy is heading and what skills we will need to deliver a prosperous future. Fanciful nostalgia for industries and working practices that have long been in decline won't help. Instead, we need to be objective and clear about which industries and services are growing and which are likely to emerge over the next 20 years. Our first priority in rebalancing the workforce must, of course, be an education and training system that creates the sort of skills that will meet the needs of Britain's future. Where reskilling is achievable, we should promote it keenly so that those who are out of work but aspire for a new job and a better future are given the opportunity to make those dreams a reality. Part of that contract is controlling our borders. However, where we identify skills or experience that are in short supply, and it's unrealistic to generate them from within our existing workforce, we should be competing with other countries to attract the very brightest and best to come here. Let me be very clear what I'm saying this morning. We need to move away from an immigration debate that is purely about numbers and start to talk about which individuals and skills we will need in the future. We need to stop talking about simply how many people are coming into Britain and start talking about which people are coming into Britain. Numbers matter because they will affect the likelihood of assimilation and put pressure on public services, but they are, on their own, an inadequate measure of a successful immigration policy. The beginning of the analysis we require already exists. In 2010, the UK Commission for Employment and Skills produced a report entitled Working Futures 2010 to 2020, which looked at future projected worker needs in the United Kingdom. According to the report, it's expected that the British economy will generate around 1.25 million more jobs in the decade leading up to 2020. But it's interesting to see where they will come and where they will not come. The groups that are expected to show the most significant increase in employment during this time are the higher level occupations, managers, directors and senior officials, around 544,000 more, or an 18% increase. Professional occupations, around 869,000 more, a 15% increase, and associate professional and technical occupations, around a 14% increase. On the other side, there are declining employment levels projected for administrative and secretarial occupations, skilled trade occupations, and process plant and machine operatives. The Prime Minister talks about the global race that we're in, and he's absolutely right to do so. Our companies are not just competing globally for contracts or investment, they're also competing for the very best people. The immigration policy that we design for this country must protect the opportunities of those who are already here, but it must also make sure that for the very best, the people with the talent to make British companies into world beaters, the doors are open and that they are made to feel welcome. There are many examples of countries that are exercising such a pragmatic approach to who crosses their borders, and there's plenty that we can learn from them. Australia seeks engineers and those with experience in the mining industry, as it foresees huge expansion in that area. Canada wants to build human capital within an ageing workforce by making provision that attract young potential migrants who have the work experience, higher education, and English or French language skills they require. The United States has long operated a green card system with quotas that advantage immigrants with a profession or experience in business, the arts, sport or academia that benefits American society and their economy. There will, of course, be important regional variations in the demand for skills and labour. Here, in London, the future of the city as the world's preeminent financial centre will at least partly depend on the ability to attract the greatest talent from around the financial world. Our capital is a global city with a high concentration of businesses whose activities are international, and they rely on a high turnover of human capital, and we must be able to facilitate that. But let's be very frank. If we're going to ensure that those with the necessary skills for the high end of our economy are more able to come to the United Kingdom, then the corollary will be that the numbers of those who come here as part of our social or cultural migration will need to be curtailed. What I'm proposing is in fact an open and shut policy. More open to those who have the skills that we need to maintain our prosperity and our place in the world, and more closed to those who, for whatever reason, would end up placing a burden on our welfare state and national infrastructure. Of course, we cannot separate the issue of immigration from the issue of the European Union. When people are asked what power they most want to see return from Brussels, guess what they say? Surprise, surprise, they want control over who crosses our borders. As we reform our welfare system and make it less of a soft touch, and simultaneously encourage those unemployed in Britain to return to the workplace, then some of the factors which have been a magnet for cheap overseas labour will be diminished. But it must be a fundamental right of any state to determine who comes into their country and who does not. It is a message that is increasingly heard across the European continent if you listen to the people of the European continent and not the governments of the European continent. If the message is not listened to and understood, it could have dangerous and destabilising consequences. Yet, predictably, the response of the political classes in Brussels is to turn a deaf ear and a blind eye. So, my message to the Commission and their cronies is this. You are the ones who are fanning the flames of frustration in Europe and paving the way for extremism. You are responsible for igniting the continent's dormant nationalisms. Your disregard for history and identity and your obsession with ever closer union can lead to the ultimate destruction of the whole EU architecture. If you break, it is because you will not bend. And when you are sitting, Mr. Commissioners, with your fat, taxpayer-funded pension, watching the edifice crumble, remember that you are the guilty man. I fear that those of us who live in the Westminster Village have, for too long, just wanted to talk about the headline numbers in the immigration debate. The Conservative-led coalition has kept its word and seen considerable success in reversing Labour's very cynical policy of opening our borders to anyone, and it's encouraging to see net migration coming down so quickly. However, as I've said, immigration is a much bigger issue than simply how many people are coming here. We need to be clear about what skills and what number of people we need in this country in order to equip our businesses with the right workforce and to make sure that our demographic remains in balance. We must acknowledge that many communities in this country have struggled to absorb the new arrivals. Some of that is because of an unwillingness to integrate, but it's also because public services infrastructure did not grow quickly enough to keep pace with the demands of a rapidly growing population, particularly in several of our regions. And the resentment that people feel is understandable, and we must be willing to address their concerns. As we are doing with Europe, welfare reform and rebuilding our economy, I believe we can also, as a Conservative Party, go into the next general election with an immigration policy that really resonates with hard-working people across this country. While some of our opponents will, as ever, seek to simplify the problem and to scaremonger, I think we can win an argument that says We need immigration for our country to grow, but that immigration must be in the interests of our country. Immigration is not just about how many people we're letting in, it's about who we're letting in and what they can do to help us get ahead in the world. Nobody should assume that they have the right to come to this country because they already have relatives here or because they happen to reside in some part of the European Union. Britons looking to emigrate to Australia, Canada or the United States fully expect to have to demonstrate their ability and willingness to contribute to their new country's society and economy. They fill in their visa applications as if they were job applications, and they think it's a privilege to be invited to go and live and work in those countries. We are in a global race, and we owe it to the next generation to compete in that race fully. They won't thank us if our competitors are cherry-picking the brightest and best for their team while we're giving a game to anyone who turns up. We need a policy that puts Britain and the British people first.